What goes up must come back down, then back up, then back down. Wait, are we talking about markets or our emotional roller coaster? From Stuart Peterson, this is the Market 360 Weekly Grain Update for the week of December 10th, 2018. My name is Chad Goodwill, and today I'm joined by Marianne Jonka, one of the market advisors on the grain team in Market 360. Marianne, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today. I'm glad that you were able to join us.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Great. So, kind of a quiet week this week as far as news was concerned. Really, the two biggest things that I had noted were that we had some chaos over in the equities markets. And we had a lot of crashes and the rebounds, and people maybe getting a little fearful over there. The other thing that happened was that the dust settled a little bit around the news that we heard coming from the G20 summit about eliminating some tariffs or maybe not starting some of the tariffs we had talked about. And I just didn't know if there was any real material impact on commodities markets regarding these two things.
Well, initially on the equity markets and commodity markets, both had an initial reaction following the G20 summit. After announcements came out, we had a big jump higher in the overnight markets on commodities and equities.
Okay.
With that news that we're going to have a truce to additional tariffs to try to work something out over the next 90 days, and China would be buying additional commodities and electronics, some other products too.
Okay.
But it was pretty big. So after that initial jump, we kind of pulled back. Equity markets a little bit more so than commodities. Commodities have held on to their gains pretty well.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen any real flight from the equities to commodities. There's not a real correlation there.
Okay.
We have seen it. 2008, 2010 were two years where you saw money directly coming out of the equity market and into commodities. But for the most part, there's not a direct relationship between the two.
So I guess then the biggest news for this week is going to be the USDA supply and demand report. So if we could start maybe with corn, and you could walk through what your expectations are for this report tomorrow.
Yeah, absolutely. This is probably one of the least volatile reports of the year, probably because the USDA doesn't change as many of the numbers as they do on a typical month. So looking at, say, last month's report, this is the November supply and demand table for corn for U.S. And they changed the yield. They lowered it almost 2 bushels an acre, which was pretty supportive to the market. And acres were left unchanged. That's probably going to be the case again. Unless they might lower it a little bit because there were still guys out there struggling to get the corn in, quite a few actually. So there might be the idea that there could be some left in the field, and they don't change the yield on this report. They wait until the January report where they give the final yield and the final acres.
Oh, okay.
So we likely won't see much for production. And then on the supply and demand side is where we'll see most of our changes this month. On the corn, though, I don't know if there's going to be a big move. They unexpectedly lowered exports, even though corn has been running ahead of last year.
Okay.
They lowered it. Now it's only a change of 12 million bushels from last year to this year, while we're running well ahead of last year's pace.
Do you have Yeah, I was just going to ask if you had a graphic for that.
Here's a chart of the export pace, this blue line being this year's export sales.
Okay.
And this is last year's, the dark red line here. So we're running well ahead. And so we should be on pace to meet the current USDA estimate or exceed it. So, one of the nice things, I want to flip back to my other chart here real quick, is the USDA has a high end on corn price being 405, maybe, an unexpected decrease this time on the exports, lower this carry out, lower the stocks to use number, and maybe the upper end moves up to 405 or 410.
Oh, okay. So what did we see price-wise this last week for corn then?
Well, this is a continuous front month corn futures.
Okay.
Right? Front month, I mean the most heavily traded contract. And when we roll it, we usually roll it right at first notice day. So this would have been the 29th of November, and this would have been the 1st of December. So you see this big gap here between, because there's a big carry in the market. A lot of grain, big carry. So one of the things we do want to watch out for is that in the past we've seen, even going back to last year, we had this huge jump from the December contract to the March contract.
Okay.
And it pulled back, and we gave some back,
Oh, right.
making that next push higher. And then from the March contract to the May contract, we pulled back, filled that gap before that next surge higher. We did it when they rolled from the May to the July too. So it's not unusual. Here I think we go from the September to the December, went back and filled it. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that happen again.
Wow.
We don't have to necessarily fill the whole gap there. We could, just kind of pull back halfway or something. But the trend is, since the big sell-off this past summer, we've seen a succession of highs that have been higher, and we've seen these lows that have been higher too, which is basically the definition of a trend higher.
Right.
So I'm still expecting to see some higher prices down the road here.
Okay. Now, transitioning to soybeans, I saw that in Bloomberg today that they had an article that China was going to announce that they're going to start resuming soybean purchases.
Yes.
Do you think that's going to have a real impact? Do you know the details on that?
I don't think it's a big move, but this is really what the market needs to see to hang on to the gains that we saw post G20 summit. We need to see China's actually physically doing what they said they were going to do if we stopped any additional tariffs. Kind of disappointing that they're only talking about adding 5 to 8 million metric tons to state reserves, which if they're buying for state reserves, it kind of circumvents their tariff on soybeans.
Oh.
But it also only means that's about 35 to 37 million bushels, which doesn't make a big impact on our carryout initially. If we can continue to do this, if this is just the first of many announcements, that would certainly help push beans to that next level higher.
So how does that 35 million bushels compare to what our carryout is?
Well, let's take a look at last month's supply and demand chart, the table here. And last month talked about 955 million carryout.
Oh, wow.
It was raised about 70 million bushels from the October report. So that would be about half what they raised it. But like I said, if this is just the first of many purchases to come, that would be great. We just have a really small window because typically U.S. exports start to slide in February because of South American supplies.
Yeah.
So we need to see a lot more purchases down the road here. Honestly, the one thing that would help with soybeans in China is hogs. They have a problem with the disease spreading in China, and that has kind of curbed their demand a little bit.
Wow.
But there's just going to be more hogs down the road, and that will pick back up again. Just like we saw here in the U.S., we've had problems before where feed demand kind of slacks off, but it very quickly comes back.
Yeah, absolutely.
On this coming report tomorrow, I would be surprised to see them make another cut to the export number, even though we are still lagging.
Okay.
Because they made such a huge cut on the last report, 160 million bushels. So a drop year to year of 229 million bushels.
Okay.
But they could. Currently, we're running 445 million bushels behind last year at this.
Wow. Can you bring up that export chart to show us what that looks like?
Here's the beans. It's the blue line is this year, and
that's not hard to see.
This is the past 5 years, so yeah, we are way behind, and we were running ahead of pace up until September, and that's really where I think the reality kicked in that a lot of these grain elevators weren't going to have the outlet to ship the beans. That's why we saw the bean basis drop so quickly in August. So here, and it can absolutely pick up. I mean, we've seen years, even last year, where we kind of started to tail off, this orange line being last year's. Yeah. But then we quickly, shot up later in the year, right in that January, February timeframe.
Okay.
A lot of that has to do with a smaller crop out of Argentina.
And then, so what did we see prices then for soybeans?
We had a gap higher. This was the low the week prior to the G20 summit. We had to move from just over 850 up to this 915 range, and we've held this jump. As a matter of fact, it did try to go back and fill that gap and failed, and we actually wound up near the high for that day. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah. Now, are you surprised by that we've been able to maintain that?
Well, I think that there's enough optimism that exports will pick up. They did pick up during the January, February timeframe last year, even though it wasn't expected to. And additional, any kind of buying from China is going to increase the pace. I don't think that these new buyers that we've seen come in, that's one of the things that's really encouraging, is that the Netherlands have been a huge buyer of U.S. beans this year.
Oh, nice.
Because you figure if China's buying all of South America's beans, that's going to make their beans more expensive. So the basis is actually cheaper to ship to the Netherlands out of the U.S. right now. So the Netherlands are big soybean processors in Europe. So they've been a big buyer of U.S. beans when they normally would be a South American bean buyer.
Yeah. Maybe that's why they do so well in the Winter Olympics every year. Well, that gives us some things to pay attention to. I'm sure we'll all be looking to see exactly what comes out of that report tomorrow. But I wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us again and step away from your desk for a few minutes to update us on markets.
You're welcome.
All right, you have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for joining us for the Market 360 Weekly Grain Update. To access additional resources or learn more about how you may be able to improve your grain marketing, either visit us at stewart-peterson.com or give us a call at 800-334-9779. This is a production of Stewart Peterson Incorporated in beautiful downtown West Bend, Wisconsin.